You're a secretary, not legal counsel." The words hit like a slap. I froze in my seat, stunned, while CEO Bradley Morrison let out a sharp laugh that echoed around the polished mahogany table. The other executives joined in, their smirks and chuckles making my face burn with shame. I'm Natalie Green. I'm 34. For the last 6 years, I've been the senior executive assistant at Gravora Group, one of the top investment firms in Manhattan. To them, I was the one who booked meetings, organized schedules, and brought coffee during long nights. What they didn't know was that behind my calm smile was a Harvard law degree. Life had other plans for me before I could use it. "Mr. Morrison," I said, trying to sound calm even though my hands trembled, "there's a loophole in Section 12 of the acquisition contract. The phrasing on intellectual property rights is unclear enough that—" "Enough." Bradley raised his hand and cut me off. His silver-streaked hair caught the sunlight pouring in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Natalie, I admire your energy, but let the legal experts handle legal matters. You didn't go to law school." The irony stung. I had gone. I'd graduated magna cum laude. But during my final year, my dad got sick. I stepped away from everything to care for him. By the time he passed, 2 years later, the legal world had moved on. The firm that promised me a future had pulled their offer. I needed money, so I took a temp job as an assistant. That was 6 years ago. And I was still here. Still unseen. "The Blackstone Tech acquisition is worth $90 million, Bradley continued, straightening his expensive tie. "We've had 3 different law firms review this contract. Some of the best legal minds in the city have signed off on it. You really think you spotted something they missed?" I opened my mouth to respond, but he was already turning away, dismissing me like I was nothing more than an interruption. The other executives resumed their discussion about the deal timeline, their voices blending into background noise as something cold and calculating settled in my chest. That night, I stayed late in the office, long after the cleaning crew had finished their rounds. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows as I sat at my desk, carefully reviewing every page of the Blackstone Tech acquisition contract. My law degree might have been gathering dust, but my mind was as sharp as ever. And there it was, buried in subsection 12.3, a poorly worded clause that could change everything. I'd always been the type of person who noticed details others missed. Growing up in Buffalo, New York, as the daughter of a blue-collar mechanic, I'd learned early that survival meant paying attention to the small things. My father, bless his soul, had worked double shifts to pay for my education, believing that his little girl could achieve anything she set her mind to. "Education is the one thing nobody can take away from you, Natalie," he used to say while reviewing my homework at our kitchen table. "Use that brain of yours." When I had received my acceptance letter to Harvard Law, the pride in his eyes had made every sacrifice worthwhile. But life has a way of derailing even the best-laid plans. Dad's cancer diagnosis came during my 3rd year, just as I was preparing for the bar exam. The treatments were expensive, and despite his protests, I knew I had to be there for him. The transition from promising law student to executive assistant hadn't been easy. The first few months at Gravora Group had been particularly challenging as I'd struggled to hide my frustration at being treated like hired help by people I could have run circles around intellectually. But I'd learned to observe, to listen, and to make myself indispensable in ways that went far beyond my job description. Bradley Morrison had always been the worst of them. At 52, he possessed the kind of arrogance that came from a lifetime of privilege. Born into old money, educated at the finest schools, he'd never known what it felt like to be dismissed or overlooked. His corner office was filled with awards and photographs of him shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, a shrine to his own importance. I'd watched him for years, noting how he treated different people. With clients, he was charming and sophisticated. With equals, he was strategic and calculating. But with people he considered beneath him, the cleaning staff, junior employees, and yes, his executive assistant, he could be cruel in his casual indifference. The Blackstone Tech deal was supposed to be his crowning achievement. The technology company had developed a revolutionary software platform that could transform how financial institutions process data. Acquiring them would position Gravora Group as a leader in fintech innovation and potentially increase the firm's value by hundreds of millions. For weeks, I'd watched Bradley strut around the office like a peacock, bragging about how he'd orchestrated the entire deal. He'd already started planning his victory speech for the board meeting, confident that this acquisition would secure his position as CEO for years to come. But now, sitting in the darkened office with the contract spread before me, I could see what the high-priced lawyers had missed. The intellectual property clause contained a critical ambiguity, one that could be exploited by someone who knew exactly what to look for. A slow smile spread across my face as the pieces of a plan began to fall into place. The next morning arrived with that crisp October chill that reminded me why I loved New York in the fall. I walked into Gravora Group's sleek lobby at exactly 8 a.m., my usual time, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same composed expression I'd perfected over the years. To anyone watching, I was simply Natalie Green, reliable assistant, starting another ordinary day. But everything had changed. I spent the morning going through my regular routine, checking Bradley's calendar, sorting his mail, preparing briefing documents for his afternoon meetings. When he arrived at 9:30, barely acknowledging my greeting as he swept past my desk into his office, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Natalie," he called through his open door an hour later. "I need you to coordinate with legal. Make sure all the final paperwork for Blackstone is ready for signatures by Friday." "Of course, Mr. Morrison." I stood and walked to his doorway, my hands clasped behind my back. "About yesterday's discussion regarding Section 12. His head snapped up from his computer screen, irritation flashing across his features. "I thought I made myself clear. That's not your concern." "I understand. I just wanted to." "Natalie." His voice carried a warning tone that made several other executives glance our way. "You're excellent at what you do. Stick to scheduling meetings and leave the legal work to the professionals." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, even as something icy crystallized in my chest. "You're absolutely right. I apologize for overstepping." He waved dismissively and returned to his screen. "See that it doesn't happen again." I walked back to my desk with measured steps, sitting down and opening my computer as if nothing had happened. But beneath my calm exterior, my mind was racing. Bradley had just made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that his dismissal would be the end of it. During my lunch break, I took a walk to the New York Public Library's main branch, claiming I needed to research some background information for an upcoming client presentation. In reality, I spent 2 hours in the legal research section, cross-referencing case law and precedents related to intellectual property acquisitions. By 3 p.m., I was back at my desk, reviewing the documents I'd printed with the careful attention of someone who'd once planned to make a career out of finding legal loopholes. The research confirmed what I'd suspected. The ambiguous language in Section 12.3 created an opportunity that could be exploited under New York State corporate law. The beauty of it was that Bradley himself had handed me the key. His condescending dismissal of my concerns had been witnessed by multiple executives, creating a paper trail that would work in my favor if anyone questioned my actions later. As I watched him through his glass office walls, gesturing animatedly during a phone call that was probably about the Blackstone deal, I couldn't help but think that he had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones hiding in plain sight. The following day brought an unexpected test of my resolve. I arrived at the office to find Bradley in an exceptionally good mood, humming as he reviewed what I assumed were the final Blackstone documents. His confidence was infectious, or it would have been if I hadn't known what I was planning to do. "Natalie," he called out cheerfully. "Cancel my 2 p.m. with Harrison. I want to take the Blackstone executives to lunch at Le Bernardin. Make the reservation for 4 people." "Certainly," I replied, already reaching for the phone. "Should I prepare any specific talking points for the lunch?" "That won't be necessary. This is just a celebration lunch. The hard work is done." He leaned back in his chair, looking every bit the conquering hero. "By Monday, this deal will be signed, sealed, and delivered. $90 million. And that's just the beginning." I made the reservation like I always did, efficiently and without a hitch. But something about the way he walked in, full of himself, made my stomach twist. For Bradley, this wasn't just business. It was another chance to show he was better than everyone else, including me. The lunch went just how he wanted. By 4 p.m., he came back with his tie loose and cheeks red from what I guessed was some overpriced wine. He was beaming. "They're eating out of my hands," he said loud enough for the whole office. "Harrison thinks I'm a genius for how I structured the deal." I watched from my desk as he told the other executives all about it, making himself the hero who pulled off the big win. He didn't mention the hours I spent digging into background details or preparing the documents. In his story, I didn't even exist. I stayed late that evening, like usual. But this time, I wasn't the only one. Thomas Rivera, one of the junior associates, was working late too. He'd always treated me with respect, like a teammate, not just the help. One time near the coffee machine, we'd talked about our backgrounds. He came from a working-class family too, the first to go to college. "Long day?" he asked as he walked by my desk around 9. "Just trying to keep up," I said, closing the file in front of me. "You know how it goes." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask. Yesterday, when Morrison cut you off about the contract, what were you trying to say?" I studied his face carefully. Thomas had been present during the humiliating exchange, and I could see genuine curiosity in his eyes, not the condescending amusement I'd grown accustomed to from others. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been reviewing the Blackstone contract for due diligence purposes, and there's something in Section 12 that's been bothering me. The intellectual property language seems." He paused, searching for the right word, problematic. My heart rate quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of problems?" "The kind that could potentially invalidate certain aspects of the acquisition if someone wanted to challenge it." Thomas sat down in the chair beside my desk. "Look, I know Morrison thinks you don't have the expertise to spot legal issues, but I've heard you ask incredibly insightful questions during strategy meetings. You see things others miss." This was dangerous territory. If Thomas was fishing for information, I needed to be careful. But if he was genuinely concerned about the contract, it might mean that my suspicions about the loophole were correct. "I appreciate your confidence in me," I said carefully. "But Mr. Morrison made it clear that legal analysis isn't my responsibility." "Morrison's an arrogant fool," Thomas said bluntly, then immediately looked around to make sure no one had overheard. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said that." "Your secret's safe with me," I assured him, and I meant it. Friday morning arrived with the kind of energy that comes before a major milestone. The Blackstone signing was scheduled for Monday, and the entire office buzzed with anticipation. Bradley had been holding court in the conference room since 8 a.m., reviewing final details with the legal team and practicing his presentation for the board meeting that would follow the signing. I went through my morning routine with extra care, knowing that today would likely be my last chance to act on the plan that had been forming in my mind all week. The research I'd done at the library had confirmed my suspicions about the loophole, and I'd spent the previous evening reviewing New York State corporate filing procedures. At 10 a.m., Bradley emerged from his office with a stack of documents and that familiar look of self-satisfaction. "Natalie, I need you to messenger these to our legal team at Harrison Blackwell and Associates. Make sure they understand this is priority one." He dropped the papers on my desk without looking at me. "Also, call my wife and tell her we'll need champagne for the celebration dinner on Monday. The good stuff, not the swill she bought for the Peterson deal." "Of course," I replied, already reaching for the phone. "Will there be anything else?" "Actually, yes." He paused at my desk, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I want you to prepare a press release announcing the acquisition, something that emphasizes my role in bringing this deal together. The board is going to want to see some public recognition of our success." The irony was almost too much to bear. He wanted me to write a press release celebrating his triumph when I was planning to destroy that very triumph within the next few hours. "I'll have a draft ready by this afternoon," I promised. "Excellent." He straightened his tie and headed toward the elevators. "I'll be at lunch with Harrison until 3 p.m. Hold my calls." The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, I felt a surge of adrenaline that reminded me of my law school moot court competitions. This was it, my window of opportunity. I walked calmly to the file room and retrieved a copy of the complete Blackstone acquisition contract, along with the supporting documentation that detailed the intellectual property transfers. Then I returned to my desk and opened my laptop, navigating to the New York State corporate filing website. The loophole I discovered was elegant in its simplicity. Section 12.3 contained language about subsidiary rights and associated intellectual properties that was vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. More importantly, it included a provision that allowed for third-party acquisition of specific subsidiary rights through direct filing with the state corporate registry. What this meant in practical terms was that someone could potentially file a claim for specific intellectual property rights associated with Blackstone's subsidiary patents, rights that weren't explicitly protected under the main acquisition agreement. If successful, such a filing would create a legal impediment that could delay or even derail the entire deal. The filing fee was $1. I spent the next hour carefully preparing the necessary paperwork, using my legal training to ensure that every detail was correct. The subsidiary rights I was targeting were related to Blackstone's data processing algorithms, not the core technology that Gravora Group wanted, but important enough that their absence would significantly reduce the value of the acquisition. As I prepared to submit the filing, my hands trembled slightly. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about proving that I was more than just a secretary, more than just the invisible woman who brought coffee and scheduled meetings. At exactly 2 p.m., I clicked the submit button and paid the $1 filing fee with my personal credit card. The deed was done. The weekend passed with agonizing slowness. I spent Saturday and Sunday in my small apartment in Queens, trying to distract myself with books and Netflix, but my mind kept returning to the filing I'd submitted. Part of me wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake, while another part felt a fierce satisfaction at having finally taken action. By Sunday evening, I'd convinced myself that nothing would come of it. Perhaps the loophole wasn't as significant as I'd thought. Perhaps the legal teams would quickly resolve any issues that arose. Perhaps Bradley would get his victory after all, and I'd remain exactly where I'd always been, invisible and overlooked. Monday morning changed everything. I arrived at the office at my usual 8 a.m. to find the lobby in chaos. Bradley was standing near the reception desk, his face red with rage as he shouted into his phone. Several other executives clustered nearby, their expressions ranging from confusion to panic. "What do you mean there's a filing dispute?" Bradley was saying. "The signing is in 3 hours. Fix this now." I walked past the group with my usual composure, noting how none of them even acknowledged my presence. In my purse, I carried a printout of the filing confirmation I'd received from the state registry, along with copies of all the supporting documentation, just in case. At my desk, I went through the motions of checking Bradley's calendar and sorting his mail, but my attention was focused on the increasingly frantic phone calls coming from his office. Through his glass walls, I could see him pacing like a caged animal, alternately yelling at someone on the phone and frantically typing on his computer. Around 9:30 a.m., Harrison Peters, the lead attorney from the legal firm handling the acquisition, arrived looking like he'd slept in his car. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, and his hair was disheveled. "Where's Morrison?" he demanded, barely glancing at me. In his office, I replied helpfully. "Should I let him know you're here?" "He knows." Harrison rushed past my desk and into Bradley's office, closing the door behind him. What followed was 45 minutes of intense discussion that I could hear even through the closed door. Words like intellectual property dispute and third-party filing drifted out, along with increasingly colorful language from Bradley that would have made a sailor blush. Finally, the door opened, and Harrison emerged looking defeated. "Natalie," Bradley called from his doorway, "cancel the signing ceremony. Tell everyone the deal has been postponed pending resolution of a legal matter." I looked up from my computer with what I hoped was an appropriately concerned expression. "Is everything all right, Mr. Morrison?" "Everything is fine," he snapped, though his white-knuckled grip on the door frame suggested otherwise. "Just a minor technical issue that will resolve quickly." Harrison cleared his throat. "Actually, Bradley, it's a bit more complicated than that. Someone has filed a claim for subsidiary intellectual property rights related to Blackstone's data processing patents. Until we can resolve this dispute, We can't proceed with the acquisition. How is that possible? Bradley's voice was rising again. We had 3 different law firms review this contract. The filing appears to exploit an ambiguity in Section 12.3, Harrison explained. It's actually quite clever. Whoever did this clearly understood this specific language and knew exactly how to use it. I felt a thrill of vindication run through me, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. This was exactly what I'd hoped would happen, but I needed to play my role perfectly. Who filed the claim? Bradley demanded. Harrison consulted his notes. Someone named Natalie Green. The silence that followed was deafening. The conference room fell silent as every head turned toward me. I could feel their stares like physical weight, but I remained seated at my desk, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Bradley's face had gone from red to white to an alarming shade of purple as the implications of Harrison's words sank in. That's impossible, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's a secretary. Actually, I said, standing slowly and walking toward the conference room, I'm a Harvard Law graduate with a Juris Doctor degree. I've been one for the past 8 years. The sound of Harrison's briefcase hitting the floor broke the stunned silence. You. Bradley pointed at me with a shaking finger. You filed this claim? I did. I opened my purse and withdrew the filing confirmation along with copies of all the supporting documentation. For exactly $1, as permitted under New York state corporate law. Harrison grabbed the papers from my hands, his eyes scanning the documents rapidly. This is actually legitimate. The filing is properly executed, and the legal reasoning is sound. But she's a secretary, Bradley repeated, as if saying it louder would somehow change reality. No, Mr. Morrison, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm a lawyer who has been working as your executive assistant for 6 years, the same lawyer who tried to warn you about this exact loophole 3 days ago. The memory hit him like a physical blow. I could see the moment when he remembered our conversation, when he recalled dismissing my concerns with those devastating words, "You're a secretary, not legal counsel." You did this on purpose, he breathed. You sabotaged my deal. I protected myself, I corrected. When I brought this issue to your attention, you chose to ignore it. You made it clear that my legal opinion was worthless because of my job title. So, I decided to let the market demonstrate the value of my analysis. The next few hours unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of chaos. Harrison spent 45 minutes on the phone with the Blackstone executives, explaining why the signing had to be postponed indefinitely. I could hear their anger and confusion even from my desk, their voices carrying through the speakerphone as they demanded answers. Bradley alternated between pacing his office like a caged animal and sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. At one point, I heard him on the phone with his wife, his voice strained as he tried to explain why their celebration dinner would have to be canceled. It's a temporary setback, he kept repeating. We'll have this resolved in a few days. But Harrison's increasingly grim expression suggested otherwise. Around 2 p.m., he pulled Bradley into the conference room for what appeared to be a very serious conversation. Through the glass walls, I could see Harrison gesturing emphatically, while Bradley's face grew paler by the minute. When they emerged 20 minutes later, Bradley looked like a man who'd just received a terminal diagnosis. Natalie, Harrison said, his voice carrying a tone of grudging respect, I need to ask you a few questions about your filing. Of course, I replied professionally, though I should mention that I've retained legal counsel to represent my interests in this matter. Bradley's head snapped up. Legal counsel? You can't afford legal counsel. Actually, I can. I smiled for the first time all day. It turns out that a $1 investment in intellectual property rights can be quite valuable when it's executed properly. Harrison cleared his throat. Miss Green, would you be willing to discuss a potential resolution to this dispute? I'm always willing to have a conversation, I said. Though I should warn you that my position is quite strong, both legally and strategically. The look of dawning horror on Bradley's face was worth every moment of humiliation I'd endured over the past 6 years. Within hours, news of the collapsed deal had spread throughout the financial district. By Tuesday morning, Gravora Group's stock price had dropped 12%, and the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. By Wednesday, Bradley Morrison had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into how such a significant legal oversight had occurred. The Blackstone executives, furious about the public embarrassment and questioning the competence of Gravora Group's due diligence process, formally withdrew from negotiations and began exploring partnerships with rival firms. Bradley's fall was quick and brutal. Industry headlines jumped on the story of how a $90 million deal collapsed over a $1 filing. At first, they focused on the legal glitch, not the real story behind it. But once it came out that he had ignored warnings from his own assistant, the very warning that could have saved the deal, his name became a warning sign. After the scandal, no top firm would even consider him. He ended up at a small investment office in Ohio, a far cry from his Manhattan power seat. At the same time, Harrison Peters reached out. He liked how I thought, both legally and strategically, and asked if I'd join his firm as a corporate lawyer. 3 more offers came in that same week. I chose Sterling & Associates, one of the city's top law firms, with a starting salary 3 times what I made as an executive assistant. As I cleared out my desk at Gravora Group, I thought about what my father once told me: no one can take your education from you. Bradley tried to shrink me, to trap me in the role of secretary. But titles don't measure intelligence. What you do does. This was the perfect revenge. Not because it hurt him, but because it was fair. The best victories are the quiet ones, where you rise simply by being exactly who you are.